Breaking news from Buckingham Palace. The royal family has just made a monumental decision that is set to change everything we thought we knew. This announcement has left the nation stunned and could reshape the monarchy's future forever. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss a single detail of this royal bombshell. In the grey, overcast London sky, the weight was palpable in the thick air. Tourists huddled in coats and scarves outside the grand gates of Buckingham Palace. Some clutched Union Jack flags, others held their smartphones aloft, ready to snap what they felt was to be an extraordinary day in the making. The grand palace towered above, its stoic surfaces taut with a restrained need that seemed to buzz. The iconic guards of bearskin hats stood even more stiffly, grim-lipped. The accustomed buzz of conversation turned into a thin, electric whisper, something momentous, something transcendent was occurring. No normal ceremony, nor formal banquet. It was not one of the royal family's standard charitable engagements. This felt distinct. The crowd's heart rate made it a collective gasp as the ornate black doors opened, a royal aide and flanked by two PA handout image of the Duke of York with his then-wife Sarah, Duchess of York. After the birth of their first child, Princess Beatrice, palace press officers emerging. The young official's face was pale but his determination clear, as he gripped a fat envelope with the wax seal of the monarchy's resplendent shade of crimson. The shutters of cameras clicked endlessly as their sound bounced off the palace walls. It brought up images of the most pivotal of the royal scenes over the history of Britain, coronations and abdications and wartime addresses, moments when the palace had something so important to say that even tradition had to bow to immediacy. But before we jump in, remember, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tick the notification bell to never miss a thing. The media got no advance notice, no embargoes of press releases, no knowing winks from royal insiders. Instead, what the reporters were caught off guard about was a surprise cross the hill summoning minutes before. It was a level of spontaneity nearly unheard of in the royal scripted realm, where every message is carefully practiced and timed. Highly experienced royal watchers knew instantly that what was written on the envelope was of huge importance. With the walls of the palace, there were things happening so quickly that it resembled hardly at all the pace of royal life. Some staff members, immaculately attired in suits and others in muted house uniforms, rushed through lush corridors. Phones rang more often than ever in other rooms. There was the Queen on the wall, keeping a straight face with a level of precision they had no choice but to match. Behind closed doors, even in times of crisis, the senior members of the royal family convened urgent council. Their whispers were low and anxious, but they maintained the best resolve and the greatest nimbleness of expression. There had been rumors that the stakes would be high. The upcoming announcement could have reverberations for years to come, altering decades-old roles and the dynamics of American politics. The monarchy, an age-old institution steeped in tradition and secrecy and appearance, was on the brink of entering the harsh glare of the world stage in a way that it hadn't for generations. And yet outside the palace gates there was a waiting game so tangible, and to get behind the real story you had to go back in time, or behind closed doors, even behind the cameras. In the secret chamber and behind the velvet, not a little had been made known to those whom sufficiently observing. Members of the royal watchers had even been aware of an unclear tension among senior members from times they'd gathered, observing that one particular senior member had not been able to smile at all, not even with their eyes, while another had not shown up, avoiding direct intermingling. Unaccounted for gaps at public events, tiny protocol variances that by themselves wouldn't mean anything, but taken as a whole hinted at a hidden rift. There are loudening whispers that rumors are now getting through the confines of the palace staff. A footman snooping in the service passageway had heard of the order to get the blue drawing room ready. The room, where private high-level meetings are often held, was being prepared with minimal notice. And one junior secretary confided, on the Q/T, to a friend that she was tasked to dig up half-century-old archival records. Suddenly there was a flurry of behind-the-scenes activity at an establishment where no movement was accidental. By mid-morning, there were whispers spreading outside. Nearby observers observed the quiet arrival of cars carrying flags of leading royals. Security was tight as plainclothes officers strategically mixed in with the crowd, with helicopters flying above. All indicators indicated that the eyes of the world would focus on that particular spot. But the biggest shock was yet to come after lunchtime when the palace's social media feeds published the cryptic message, a message of resolve from the very mouth of the king. Before long the king will be revealed and speculation and excitement is being generated. News stations immediately cut into their programming and within minutes online message boards were abuzz with various speculation, from family trouble to political unrest. Press Corp, outside the palace, exchanged speculations with growing anticipation of everything from deeply personal matters on one hand to political strategy as regards the Commonwealth on the other. In the palace's most magnificent chamber, King Charles sat somberly at a table, with trusted advisors and family members at his side. The crowd knew what the announcement was and the fact that it was irrevocable. As things grew tense in the chamber, the king's eye fell on a folder containing information that he was not allowed to see. And with a nod to his private secretary, the time had come to speak to the crowd outside, whose murmurs had grown into what would go down in the history books as a key public moment. The royal aide appeared again, this time with the palace press secretary. Slowly, the press secretary turned down a sheet of paper, his movements controlled. But even before speech was spoken, a wonderful thing happened. A stillness settled down over that vast gathering, the very flag ceased to wave. It was that silence that tells you you're about to see either great victory or great tragedy, the stillness before the unfolding of a fact that will become history. Whatever was to be revealed, it was clear it would be no mere snippet in the royal annals. It was a moment that was meant to be dissected, parsed and preserved for generations. The cameras, 1,000 cameras, zeroed in, and for a moment the world held its breath waiting as the press secretary began to talk. What came in the minutes to follow had the potential to change everything, the relationship between royals, public trust in the monarchy and the future of the crown itself. And that perhaps was the most unsettling thing about all of this, it was an impending announcement, a full story as to why and what came next had yet to properly tell its tale. This was just the opening act in a larger and more complex drama which would unveil to an alien world the truths obscured for centuries in the shadow of conventional wisdom. It was the exact point at which the monarchy stepped out of the centuries-old train of protocol and blinked into the uncertain glare of the future. As the words rang through the palace courtyard, the world came closer, not to hear the message but to understand it for what it was. The hours before the announcement were unextraordinary. Even eerily mundane, as if the palace itself wanted to disguise the storm of change on the horizon. The sun rose over London in the usual dull way, smearing a pale gold across the palace. The sentries stepped confidently along their many long meters of the same path, their boots thudding sharply on the cobble. Freshly baked pastries wafted from nearby cafes, mingling with the crisp morning air as the first visitors of the day made their way towards the gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of royal glory. But behind all this seeming peace, a gentle undercurrent was running, softly splashing against the normal rhythm of the palace. Discerning regulars, who visited the gates by week and knew the guard rotations by heart, sensed something was different. The guards' watches appeared to be a trifle accelerated, their black lookouts more alert. The volume of police flanking both ends also increased dramatically, with more uniformed cops lurking on the streets of the palace on the sly, adding to the palpable difference in the air. The general looseness of morning staff talk was replaced by tight, functional talk. The royal establishment was a well-oiled one, schedule packed minute by minute, movement rehearsed to death. But on this day, the machine-like rhythm was faster, revving up its gears to an urgent speed that even the most jaded of courtiers could not conceal. A government courier came out of the blue, with a wax-sealed diplomatic pouch. An aide dashed down the east corridor with a stack of briefing folders, her heels clattering on the marble floor. The movement could be seen even in the palace kitchens. The royal chefs generally served senior family members light breakfasts, but there was suddenly a bustle to make some space and cancel some of the catering orders. It was where, in the course of the messing about and rather inebriated activities, the original plans of the day had been placed to one side as a result of what had played out on that day. Even the gardeners, who were used to working quietly in the palace grounds, were directed this morning to clear entire sections of the foot traffic in other spaces, funneling people into smaller walking paths there. The clues were all there long before mid-morning. Black Range Rovers with tinted windows poured through the gates of the palace one after the other. Some cars had official emblems, others people known only to an inner clique. Out of these cars, various people had gotten out: chief aides, private secretaries, family members, none of whose public schedules suggested they should be in London today. Such moves have serious consequences for the inner circles of the palace. Throughout royal history, this abrupt assembly always meant only the gravest, events requiring unity, tactics, and prompt action. But there was an undercurrent of tension, as if every moment before the official news was hugely fateful. Outside the palace gates, the air felt tense, even charged. They were huddled around St. James Park, trying, as they are wont to do when there are no royals around, to parse news of a royal at a snail's pace, while the world felt entitled to scramble to account for the suddenly heightened activity. Editors in newsrooms encouraged their royal correspondents to dig for information that they didn't yet have, and to put their cameras on the palace in case something happened. On the Brussels office's walls for major networks, screens equipped for live updates instead broadcast old clips of past announcements, ready to be swapped out in an instant by a live feed of a palace footman carrying news. This fusion of age-old tradition with contemporary broadcast reminded viewers that history was about to repeat itself in a new form. Inside the palace, the royal family was assembled in a somber stateroom, a space ordinarily reserved for pivotal diplomatic discussions and weighty decisions. The thick velvet drapes were closed, creating a feeling of stuffiness, insulating the room from the outside. In the center of the room was an oval table, carefully set up with papers, briefings, and a silver tray bearing a pair of glasses of water. Although the atmosphere was formal, an undercurrent of strain was palpable in the room, with glances darting in all directions, tight clenching of hands, and the occasional deep sigh that exposed the seriousness of the hoping-to-be-made decision. The attendees were called with few details. Some were told to break existing plans, others received bare bones, almost mysterious instructions from their private secretaries. Some came thinking they'd be briefed, only to discover they were summoned to become decision-makers in a process whose implications were immense and would ripple far outside the palace walls. King Charles was washed over, perched at the end of a table, a cross, somber look on his face. The creases at the corners of his eyes seemed deeper somehow, and he couldn't tear his eyes away from the papers in front of him despite the fact his thoughts weren't focused on what he was looking at. On his right, Queen Camilla leant forwards, pale, fingers interlaced on the table. To his left, Prince William sat with his jaw clenched, a little bit hunched forward and bracing himself. Advisors and aides had whispered updates, and experienced in ritual and pageantry, the Lord Chamberlain, the manager of ceremonial aspects of the monarchy, stumbled through the unknown. The Secretary of Communications was going through a pile of drafts of a prepared announcement. Each person brought his own subtly different shade of tone and style. These nuances had the ability to influence public opinion, as to whether it was a strength show or weakness. Debates raged, punctuated by occasional flare-ups that were quickly doused by mutual acknowledgement. A little too much of a good thing divulging too much emotion might risk the cohesion required to maintain their public persona. Discussions focused on the specific phrasing, when to make the announcement and who to tell about his decision. Others called for transparency as soon as possible, cautioning that delays could lead to leaks. Some advised caution, stressing the need for meticulous verification before jumping onto the big stage. The streets outside were buzzing. Rumors of a spectacle brewing at the palace had attracted more than just the regular crowd. Curious locals and hardy rubberneckers flocked to the scene, as TV crews alternately hovered by the gates. Journalists from all corners of the globe melded with a handful of press pins, another excitedly anticipated, and were spread thin. There was excitement in the palace. The sounds of preparation were muted that morning, the low hum of the printers, the stealthy movements of aides ferrying notes from one chamber to another, the heavy footfall of guards taking their posts. They were the prelude for the coming release of history, the calm before the storm, when one undisputable fact remained: once these gates were flung open and the words began to flow, there would be no turning them back. The spotlight was not only on the royal family's announcement, but on the international response and what it means for the monarchy's future. What we must remember is the protocol followed at Buckingham Palace is not just a tradition, it's a lost art perfected over the centuries to preserve the dignity, mystery, and long history of our monarchy. Each outburst is carefully stage-managed, delivered with exquisite timing and with a sense of position that reflects the power of the crown while protecting its inner workings. But on this day the royal family would take a course that even their long-standing wing watchers could not believe. They broke with their own traditions. In living memory, the royal family made major announcements to a specific process. Close family were told first, and then a few political figures, such as the Prime Minister and Commonwealth realm leaders. The public would then be notified, usually in the form of a pieced-together statement mounted on the ornate gilded easel outside the gates of the palace, along with a press release sent, under embargo, to trusted members of the media. The structured process was designed to avoid confusion, leaks, and premature speculation. But nowhere this time was the leading the usual protocols observed. No gold easel, no advance subtle hints to the press, and no pre-coordination with government officials to ready their responses. Instead, the palace acted quickly and clearly. The communications office cobbled together a message in under an hour, sidestepping several layers of internal approval. Then aides were called into the room on a last-minute basis without explanation. Phones were confiscated at the door to prevent early disclosures. Their statement would not, as if commonly done in the past, just be a notice pinned to an easel, but a live, moment-by-moment communication to global audience. It was the single decision that in itself broke with decades of tradition. The last time the royal family released a direct and immediate announcement was in extraordinary circumstances, when Princess Diana died. The speech had been extensively vetted and rehearsed for hours before being given today. It was just so alive, big, urgent, almost frantic. Inside the palace's communications war room, staff worked with an intensity rarely seen in royal halls. Giant screens displayed the latest news from newscasts and social media. Couriers zoomed back and forth between the chambers with printed drafts adorned with their time of completion and heavy red edits. In one spot, the press secretary was reading over a list of members of the press that were allowed inside the Vastery-zoned briefing room. At the same time, a senior government official spoke on the phone with BBC, ITV, and Sky News to confirm that their live feeds were ready for the speech to start imminently. The decision to break protocol sooner had not been taken lightly. Royal advisors at the highest level argued feverishly about tradition versus the speed of news in a modern age. Traditionalists cautioned that acting too quickly could give rise to errors, misunderstandings, or blowback. On the other hand, advocates for taking a swift stance argued that in the world today, fast action was the only way to stack up to control of the narrative. The compromise reached was a response that was both immediate and unambiguous, designed to strike a balance between formality and the need to seize the public's attention. Before rumors had the chance to take a life of their own, Prince William called for action. His reasoning was simple: in the age of instant news, the monarchy could not afford to have its message shaped by outside voices before it reached members of the public directly from the palace. He cited examples of past crises that had been worsened by slow communication to illustrate his point. Queen Camilla, who sat opposite him, advised caution, saying the monarchy's credibility depended on playing it cool and sticking to tradition. Finally, King Charles had to relent the wisdom of his heirs, but it was obvious how decision was feeling heavy on the countenance when he made bow to his heirs. When the decision to pick was made, the palace double-timed the process. The grand court that serves formal events was quickly prepared for a live broadcast, with technicians quietly setting up cameras, microphones and lighting. In the middle was a lectern bearing the royal coat of arms with 2 Union Jack flags on each side. The setting of the palace's iconic frontage suggested it was a message from the heart of the monarchy. At the same time, press briefing invitations went out in a storm of encrypted messages and phone calls. Reporters bracing for hours in the sun scrambled to rebook flights or reshuffle plans as their show producers sent orders in their earpieces. Satellite vans were repositioned for the best signal strength, and cameramen tightened shots and checked gears, in readiness for the instant. Amid the preparation, the murmurs spread among the there assembled crowd that the violation of protocol itself was a message. The public was aware that the palace seldom took impulsive action. The choice to break amid the tradition and talk directly was considered a signal of great weight, maybe even explosive. Rumors began to circulate as quarters became abuzz with various theories surrounding the announcement. Theorists speculated about national security matters, or a personal scandal involving the royal family. A few even muttered quietly about the possibility of abdication, a word with historic resonance in Britain. The final version of the statement was approved with less than 20 minutes to go before the program was due to be aired. Printed on luxurious cream stationery with the royal crest embossed in the top, copies of the letter were ceremonial, and guaranteed the words would be preserved in the palace archives. The press secretary stood behind a rickety podium and read with control from the teleprompter while the audience grew hushed, staring at the space as his voice ricocheted. TV anchors hurried to review the situation, their tones mirroring the audience's interest. When the press secretary emerged to speak with 2 aides, it was obvious that he was finally breaking the norm. It was a live dispatch, direct from the palace to the world. Pausing, the press secretary appeared to recognize a new era in the way the monarchy was communicating with its subjects. The moment the first words were uttered, it became clear it was a deliberately, recklessly committed sin against protocol and the right thing to do. Whatever it had said would now become public. The first wave of reaction echoed quickly, and even before the press secretary spoke, it was moving away like a shockwave. In the throng of onlookers at the palace gates, people leaned in, some of them straining to hear every word. The looks on their faces were a combination of disbelief and anticipation. And though it was quietly written, it was hardly a serene message. Even those who expected something big were unable to entirely grasp what was happening at the time, along with fellow reporters. The response was immediate and intense. Photographers who made their livings freezing moments in time let loose a fusillade of photos, one after the next, their shutters clapping madly. Correspondents mouthed panicked messages to their producers through live feeds, some wildly gesturing to convey the urgency of the moment. Moments later, the palace's announcement was beamed live to living rooms, offices, and mobile phones around the world. Television networks immediately adjusted their light midday programming to live coverage. Social media responses came almost immediately on platforms such as X and Instagram. It was only a matter of minutes before the hashtags about the royal family began trending. Screens around the world flared to life with breaking news alerts. Excerpts from the live broadcast circulated widely, and there were disgusted emojis as well as lengthy emotional analyses where every element of the statement was considered. The actual words, for most people, didn't matter compared with the audacity of the lack of tiptoeing or slowness in getting a message straight from the palace's typically do-it-by-the-book, controlled, slow faucet. The answers were eye-opening. An elderly couple pressed toward the front of the crowd, gripping each other's hands tightly, their eyes glistening with a mix of pride and sorrow. Below, a gang of adolescent bystanders were murmuring among themselves, disbelieving and curious. Tourists who happened to be caught among the crowd took out their phones and snapped photos of what they knew would be historic moments. It was a for-life story, about how they saw a major life change happening, unmodified above. How people responded wasn't always so grave. From the other side of the barricades, some voices made sharp comments, some in supportive tones and others critical. The monarchy has long been a factionalizing force, and in times like this, such factions stand out in stark relief. Even for everyone who has been supporting the crown's decision, there has been another wondering at the motives of the crown or accusing it of trying to distract attention from underlying truths. The media sensed the tension. This was more than just a moment in royal history, it was a dangerous turning point that may deepen rifts in the battered monarchy's already troubled relationship with the people. Television networks scrambled to assemble commentators, including former royal aides, historians, and political analysts, to lend immediate perspective. Some praised the announcement for its boldness and for the decision to speak directly to the public, while others warned that so dramatic a break with protocol could do damage to the credibility of a monarchy that would soon face scrutiny in television interviews conducted by the prince's accuser, Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Opinions split neatly in two. One side saw this as a necessary step towards modernization, the other a gamble. Across the Atlantic, the American networks quickly found the story, and the angle they took was similar but slightly different: more speculation, more drama. Morning talk shows devoted entire segments to conjecture about the potential backstory. Celebrity commentators who had met the royals during their visits to the Commonwealth nations were invited, and reactions differed greatly. Where there were strong Republican sentiments, critics pounced on the opportunity to stir up calls to sever ties between the monarchical head of state and the Commonwealth realm. The news brought a mixture of dismay and loyalty, as leaders released carefully worded statements that called for unity in the streets of London. Groups gathered around screens in crowded pubs with TVs, momentarily forgetting their pints as they watched events unfold. The exchanges that have sprung up between strangers who previously would have walked obliviously past one another. Some murmured about the news, as if its gravity was to be treated with the respect of a church service, while others chatted excitedly in flurries of speculation over who would succeed him, what it meant for the line of succession, and questions of family dynamics and internal relationships and Britain's standing in the world in hushed pockets of the city. The reactions were deeply personal. Older Britons, who had seen the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and the age of royal stasis, found the transformation disorienting, not just in content but in tone, the erosion of the accustomed rituals of their youth. Younger generations, however, largely embraced the dramatic step, seen by many as a needed break from the old ways of the monarchy operating in secrecy. The emotional response was most keenly felt among those with a personal connection to the institution: retired members of palace staff, charity workers associated with a royal patronage, and families who had met members of the royal family through public engagements. The news reignited, for some, a sense of pride in the continuing relevance and adaptability of the crown. For others, it left a lingering unease, suggesting there was something more complex, more profound, that had yet to be revealed. Back in the press pen, as the statement concluded, a flurry of activity overcame the journalists. His face was rosy, and questions were shoved over to the press secretary, though many were tactfully brushed aside. Outside, hordes of cameramen trained their lenses on the palace gates, awaiting any sniff of a senior royal in public. And Goodreads fans were off to the races, even though the news was over. Newsroom editors wanted the full complement of coverage, the news of the official statement in combination with analysis from different perspectives: political, cultural, historical. On social media, armchair analysts immediately started dissecting slow-motion clips of the press secretary's facial expressions, scouring for subtle signals or hesitations that might betray more than words could express. Theories commenced to multiply, and the last one was more complex than the next. Just an hour later, the world went from astonished to sharing, from bystander to article amongst the audience. The silence that had fallen over the palace at the start was replaced by the chorus of those voices, admiring, appalled, but all grappling with the realization that a basic tenet of the royal tradition was being upended before their eyes. It was the first test of the impact of the announcement, a test to see whether the monarchy could shape the discussion or would be carried off an unpredictable current of popular response. By the end of the day, it was clear that this wasn't just a matter of what was said, but what wasn't, and how massive a moment it really was, and how many unaddressed questions it raised. Long before the press secretary walked to the podium, before cameras snapped to life and as a crowd gathered at the palace gates, the timeline of events leading to this moment was already in play. Behind it, and hidden from sight, was a series of secret discussions, complex negotiations, and strategic decisions that have been occurring over the past several weeks, maybe even months. This was the story no one heard. It was the portion shrouded in whispers and sealed notes that the palace did not reveal. It had all started as a casual meet-up at Sandom, just a family reunion among relatives. In appearance, a relaxed, seasonal event, the guest list told a different story. Senior royals who had not gathered in the same room for months were there too, along with a few quite well-known constitutional advisors who, unlike the members of the family, are known not to have been focused on the successions more than family relationships. No press was officially informed and no official pictures were released. The fortunate few who had heard whispers of the meeting, tantalizing snippets over the serving staff's increasingly limited mileage over the manufacturing floor, told each other that the members gathered within were as odd a group as you could imagine: the king, the king's principal legal advisor, as well as heir, the select handful of responsible, trusted aides drawn from the royal inner household. On the glossy mahogany table, pivotal documents had been fanned out, some more than a decade old. These were not papers to be dismissed as nostalgic artifacts. They were important in terms of legal, political, and financial, and only select parts of it were censored to protect confidential information. 2 witnesses later revealed obliquely that the talks concerned the mechanics of the royal family and its relationship with the government. Other contracts, obligations to former organizations, and the consequences of breaking those obligations were also mentioned. The ensuing deliberations were fraught. Few urged that there should be no delay. Instead, there were those who warned against precipitous action, with an eye to the dangers of surface agitation and even the danger of a complete loss of control. Even if public perception of the monarchy was an issue, one argument that kept coming up was that some changes were inevitable, and the longer the monarchy put them off, the worse things would get. A turning point came when the king was shown a secret report that had been prepared months earlier. Its findings were blunt and, perhaps damning in some respects, based on detailed information from both official channels and private investigators to describe a situation that could no longer be radical without discreet diplomacy. The report identified outside pressures attempting to influence royal decisions in the direction of private scuttlebutt that, if revealed, could generate media firestorms capable of consuming the whole institution. The king listened politely to the presentation, staying calm but vigilant, but observers could see small changes in his demeanor, the clenching of his jaw, the hold of the armrests of his ceremonial chair. Better than anyone else, he understood that the monarchy's survival would depend on more than just public affection, but the ability to project stability and control. Allowing this to materialize would put both at risk. Subsequent to that, everything was secretly arranged over the following weeks, in a way barely perceptible to the rest of the world. Advisors reached out to key government players, not to spill the beans, but to test their reactions. And armies of lawyers combed through every possible scenario to make sure everything they did would play in a court, or the court of public opinion. Even the royal press team, whose members were used to being confined by traditional parameters, wrote up different versions of an announcement, some cautious, some more forthright. Then there was the internal machinations of the royals, adding a whole other level of complexity. The king's strategy was not allowed by all members. Others felt blindsided, left out of the inner circle of decision-making. That simmering discontent hid behind polite eruptions at public meetings perceptible only to the observant. A senior member of the royal family was overheard making a cryptic remark to a confidant at a charity gala. "They think they can control this. but they cannot stop something that is already underway. At the same time, the media were on a story they didn't understand, trying to get tidbits. One opinion piece in a column wildly speculated about signs of change within the monarchy, and a political blog, meanwhile, claimed that senior palace aides were gathering for late-night strategy sessions. None of these stories told the whole truth, but together they fostered an undercurrent of anticipation. There was something on the horizon, although what it was remained obscured behind palace walls. The tension inside became denser, with the longest-serving staff saying they had never seen such dramatic events behind the scenes. Discreet meetings were organized at odd hours with uncertain participation. Discussions were conducted in heavily monitored rooms to avert electronic surveillance. There was a determined effort to stage the time of the announcement to fit the palace agenda, not the media's. Yet, despite the utmost secrecy, there are some chinks. Information usually is confidential and gets to the worst individuals at the worst time of heightened emotion. Whether by accident or design, all manner of minor missteps, an overheard cell phone conversation in a hotel lobby, a momentarily unattended briefcase, a misdirected text message, you name it, can wipe out months of careful strategizing. Bits and pieces of the bigger picture started to drip into the wider world, feeding rumors and helping to cement the palace's resolute plan of action. In the nick of time, however, an important event took place, a secret letter sent to the king. The sender was anonymous, but insiders have suggested that the person would have probably had important links in both the royal family and the UK government. The letter, which an insider described as both a warning and a challenge, demanded action and suggested consequences far beyond the walls of the palace. The pressure of that letter, along with the growing threat of opportunities for leaks, forced the king to make a hasty announcement. According to some reports, senior family members were summoned to London within a few hours, even those who had so far been emotionally kept at arm's length. Advisors worked through the night to fashion a statement that would be transparent enough to keep from inflaming the public while also reflexive enough to shield the palace. As the press secretary eventually took to the podium, the public saw only the calm delivery and measured tone, not the weeks of behind-the-scenes strife, strategy sessions and emotional brawls that it took to get there. Under the placid surface, a story of urgency, discord, and the burden of history lay pressed and simmering. The backstory made sense of why protocol was ignored, speed took precedence over tradition, and why this exact moment was selected for royal family members to speak. Vision enigmatic King Charles III was at the center of the developing drama as both the monarch and the head of the family. From the moment Charles ascended to the throne, he had to face unprecedented challenges, including a changing monarchy, shifting public attitudes, interfamily tension, and a more intrusive media environment. This declaration, the assertion of his sovereignty, would not just determine his rule, it would determine how he was remembered. From the outset, Charles brought to his job a mixture of reverence for tradition and a practical awareness of the need for change. At an even earlier stage, his long-standing commitment to environmental and social themes had made him something of a figure of the left. But he carried centuries of expectation on his shoulders, trapped within the walls of the palace. The monarchy was based on tradition and continuity. Charles saw the value of change compared to stagnation. In private meetings out of public view, those who worked closely with the king painted a picture of a man who had been grappling with enormous responsibilities. As the announcement drew close, Charles was said to be measured but firm, frequently entering into late-night discussions that underscored the need to defend the monarchy and his future line to the throne. Palace sources recalled the times when the king's characteristically steely bearing slipped to display simmering frustration, the inner turmoil of trying to find equilibrium between dedication to family and public duty. Charles's relationships with his family members were complex and multifaceted, shaped by years of public scrutiny and private conflicts. His approval of the announcement fueled speculation among some insiders that he had been forced into the move in order to reassert his authority and to clarify the direction of the monarchy at a time of crisis. Conversely, others saw this as a defensive or protective move to insulate the institution from further damage by confronting difficult issues head-on. Prior to making the announcement, Charles is said to have held many discussions with his private office, his stable of lawyers, and political confidants. The conversation with the Prime Minister were described as deep and candid, a measure of the weighty constitutional significance of the looming address. Aware that any misstep that undermined public faith in the monarchy could have dire consequences for him, the king kept on his guard. In a private dinner with senior members of the Commonwealth, Charles openly described the need for transparency and for the organization to be reborn. Implied in diplomatic language, those remarks were taken by some in the room as an indication of future changes to be announced. Charles's desire to present the monarchy as flexible and relevant in a rapidly changing world were apparent in his remarks. But the king's role came with a personal price. Charles had cut himself off from certain family members, royal correspondent Simon Viga added, and it had come after there was a disagreement the timing and type of announcement that was to be made. This separation caused a tension in the family, which resulted in rumors of deepening rifts between them at public engagements. Charles looked particularly serious in the run-up to the announcement. Reporters complained about the fact that O'Rourke wouldn't answer their questions and that he was taking his own sweet time in an unhurried stroll through the crowds. Some said that he was feeling the pressure of momentous decisions that were drawing closer, while others understood it to be the reflective stoicism of a king in troubled times. The king's language in announcing his decision, in itself conveyed the directness, dignity, candor and caution which have come to characterize his approach to the public. You can hear the tone includes nothing over the top, but yet it is serious, it is a sense of urgency and it does need to change, John added. Analysts later praised the tone as a master class in royal diplomacy, complimenting how Charles struck notes of both authority and empathy. But it wasn't enough for some of his critics. Some royal watchers and insiders in the family had seen the announcement as a sign that Charles was willing to put institutional survival ahead of family harmony. Critics argued that his moves could alienate influential family members and dismantle popular support. Backers in the press contended that it was exactly such audacity that the monarchy needed to survive. Charles's role wasn't confined to the minutes after the bombshell was dropped, he also helped manage the explosion's fallout. He had also played a major role in liaising with the palace's communications team to respond to questions, planning subsequent appearances and sculpting the emerging narrative. His efforts underscored a realization that leadership is not a one-time event but a constant process, especially in the case of such a highly publicized monarchy. In the weeks since the announcement, Charles has continued to work with stakeholders across the UK and the Commonwealth. In his speeches, he has emphasized unity, continuation, and the evolving role of the monarchy, seeking to reassure those alarmed by the changes. And the specter of the announcement lingers, emblematic of both strong leadership and the steady dawning of King Charles. His decision instead to put transparency ahead of tradition is a more radical change in his reign and suggests a monarch prepared to tackle hard truths about the monarchy's future. This fraught role, with so many personal and political hazards, would overshadow his reign few times over. Prince William had been a key, if complicated, figure in the developing drama. As the heir apparent, his approach to the announcement would surely influence public sentiment and determine the royal family's own internal balance. For William, this was not only a moment of support for his father, it was also his attempt to establish his vision of the monarchy going forward. In the run-up to the announcement, William was instrumental in discussions, which fused tradition with modernization, demonstrating his pragmatic and forward-thinking outlook. Realizing that modernizing the monarchy was necessary in order to keep the institution relevant for the 21st century, keeping its core values intact, William's approach to engagements and tours was forward-looking, guiding the monarchy through uncertain times. His developing friendship with King Charles moved from mentor to a mutual respect of each other as friends. Sure, they bickered on occasion, but we could see that they both agreed on the mission to protect the monarchy's legacy. In private conversations he urged for open, transparent communication with the public, arguing that secrecy in an age of instant information would only fuel suspicion. But his role was not without its difficulties. Some palace insiders suggest that William initially had qualms about when to make the announcement, concerned about the backlash and fallout within the family. He is said to have advised a cautious approach that emphasized the need to communicate accurately with the public and manage their expectations. This caution, thereby, sometimes put him at odds with more precipitate characters in the palace who preferred immediate action. Nevertheless, with his usual skepticism, William eventually gave the go-ahead to the presentation. He had been calm yet resolute in televised appearances leading up to the announcement. He talked about the importance of resilience and accepting change during a visit to a children's hospital. These lines would later be viewed as coy hints about the changes to come. Williams was instrumental in deciding how the news would be communicated, liaising closely with palace communications to ensure that the messages were frank yet comforting. He concentrated mainly on maintaining the public's trust. Acknowledging the difficulties the monarchy was facing, the Duke's own contribution to the statement ensured it offered not only immediate clarity, but also a vision for long-term stability. The effect of where William stood was immediately clear, as supporters praised his position as a unifying figure after the announcement. He was viewed as someone who could span generations, reaching out to younger audiences. His carefully calibrated answer carried the message that the monarchy was modernizing but not stooping. Yet his position prompted a backlash from traditionalists who believed he was going off-piste from the age-old mystique of the royal family. Some wondered whether his investor-friendly philosophy would worsen the rift in the family and among some family members who have been resistant to change. William's was a diplomacy of graduated severity. He felt he should show loyalty to his father and to the institution of the monarchy, but also try and mollify those who felt cut out of the announcement. Private conversations relayed to the news media described tensions interspersed with efforts to find common ground and understanding. William's written response was guarded after the announcement. In speeches and interviews, he emphasized themes of duty, service and continuity, repeatedly reminding the public that the monarchy's power derives from adapting while not losing sight of its origins. He spoke to make those still in shock at the suddenness of the news, and eager to be reassured about the future of the monarchy, feel a bit better. Through social media posts, community center visits and public appearances, the Duke is fully involved in engaging with the public, reflecting his desire for accessibility and modern relevance. They offered evidence that those responsible had a skillful intelligence. They understood that the very survival of the monarchy depended on it forming real bonds with its people. William's example represented a generational change in the royal family. At the same time, honoring the traditions with reverence, he recognized the requirement for the monarchy to adapt if it is to be relevant in a world where openness and everything changes so quickly. Such leadership has made him not only a central player in shaping the future role of the monarchy, but also a future figurehead. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's shadow loomed over the announcement, creating a morass of complexity and intrigue that fascinated the public and palace insiders alike. Even though they were all the way across the pond, in the corridors of Buckingham Palace and behind the columns of the reasoning that the royal family used to do what it did, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's presence loomed large. Already, their choice to shed full-time royal duties in the earlier years has rewritten the dynamics of the family and the perception of the monarchy. In frank interviews, via acts of charity and, sometimes, through a fractious relationship with the media, they were the subject of both support and hostility. As the palace geared up for its historic announcement, questions emerged about how this estranged couple played into the story, and whether the changes were a response to their power or power plays. Harry and Meghan were reportedly given some heads-up about the announcement before it was announced publicly, sources told Insider. But their contribution was modest. According to reports, the couple did not write the statement themselves, but were informed of the wording to avoid any surprises on their part. Yet their supporters' reaction reportedly was mixed, from acceptance to frustration. Some close aides of the couple interpreted the announcement as a veiled swipe at the couple's decisions and a move to reclaim control of the royal narrative. The timing of the announcement, which came after ongoing legal battles and press controversies around Harry and Meghan, led to speculation that the palace was seeking to draw a line under past conflicts and turn attention elsewhere. Observers noted that some of the language in the statement appeared designed to tap into ideas around loyalty, family unity, and public service, themes that have clearly struck a chord with them based on previous comments and actions. His grandson, Harry, has been closely watched in private, and he reportedly has been torn over the decision, wanting to protect his family's legacy and feeling detached from the institution he once served. Close associates said he had been determined to defend his independence but wary of the increasing tensions the announcement would prompt. Meghan, in contrast, was seen as fiercely protective of their family, using her platform to advocate for transparency and personal empowerment, views that at times ran contrary to the palace's wishes. Media coverage tended to hone in on what they dubbed the Harry and Meghan factor, casting the announcement as a chapter in an unfolding story about the couple's complex relationship with the monarchy. Headlines mulled the possibility of the coming of new reconciliations, further rifts, or far juicier disclosures on the horizon. Supporters of the couple saw the announcement as a long-overdue reckoning. Detractors viewed it as the palace's bid to reassert its authority. In the wings, actions were being taken to mitigate the optics of such a fraught moment. Palace communications teams worked in close consultation with the representatives of Harry and Meghan to avoid public rifts and mixed messages. But those tensions, which were inherent, made these efforts difficult at times, and there were occasional leaks and mixed messaging. Public opinion was polarizated, despite the best of intentions, of course. Much of the population felt sorry for Harry and Meghan in their desire to be independent and private, and many saw this as a commentary on the monarchy's refusal to modernize. Others, on the other hand, argued that the couple's decision to step back and make public critiques weakened the family, undermined trust in the royal family among the public, and required the palace to respond directly. The shadow of Harry and Meghan was longer than just the media's or public's image. It was deeply felt within the family, and their carols and private mail had a mix of letters wishing for a reconciliation and anger over supposed wrongs. Some family members were pinning their hopes on their announcement kickstarting new discussions, others saw it as a line finally being drawn. The statement tangentially addressed issues that have been highlighted by Harry and Meghan, including the importance of duty and the sacrifices of public life, as well as reinforcing the monarchy's values and customs. It was an implicit reminder that while adaptation was crucial, there were lines that could not be crossed. In the weeks that followed, scrutiny of Harry and Meghan's behaviors grew in intensity, as observers sifted through their public comments and social media, their public appearances and their private interactions in search of clues about how they were faring. They were relatively silent in public, which drew two reactions, depending on the observer, that masked their strategy or was merely evidence of profound separation. The continuing presence of Harry and Meghan symbolized the monarchy's changing challenge, forcing the royal family to face difficult questions about identity, loyalty, and how to reconcile timeless tradition and modernity. Nor was the announcement merely a statement addressing these lingering concerns, it was also a signpost pointing to new directions. Comprehending the announcement required accepting the immense shadow cast across modern Britain by Queen Elizabeth II, whose nearly 7 decades on the throne had molded the society and set the tone for what it means to lead the monarchy. Her sense of continuity had provided stability at times of trauma, symbolizing duty, endurance, and the long look forward. The coming break with custom for the British royal family to release a statement so extraordinary was the most obvious indication of the long shadow of the late Queen's legacy on those in the palace and across the realm. Each and every major alteration would be judged against the yardstick she had already set and the deeply emotional relationship she had had with people even after she had passed. It was a statement that caught a precise moment in time, the ideal moment to both celebrate her years of service and acknowledge that the monarchy must move into a new era beyond her. Specializing in silent, reflective, thoughtful adjustment, Queen Elizabeth's reign was a model of quiet, deep adjustment while the public queen was all unswerving. Behind the scenes she managed to keep abreast of new political scenes, family upsets and altered audience tastes with an agility that belied her taciturn front. She personified a stiff upper lip style of leadership of quiet strength and stoic duty, a trait that this latest announcement seems both to summon and to challenge in all of the senior members of the royal household. There was an understanding that this moment wasn't just about the current monarchy but about enshrining the Queen's legacy. Advisors often described her vision in irreverential terms, saying that much of what was hinted at in the announcement represented an extension of plans she had quietly endorsed, such as spurring innovation, internationalizing the campus and breaking down professional barriers among faculty members. Yet the announcement was also testament to the tension around maintaining tradition and moving forward. For generations, the monarchy had relied on rituals, protocols and symbols to connect the present to the past. The balance that Queen Elizabeth had struck was so adroit, how British over so many decades she had made herself to look, how timeless, a mood that masked tremendous inner change. Now, her successors were faced with the challenge of maintaining that sense of continuity even as they navigated a world that demanded transparency and immediacy. Public sentiment mirrored this dualism. In a country changing quickly from a traditional society to a modern one, there was widespread sadness at the loss of a monarch, and at what was seen as the end of an era of stability and decorum. But there was, however, an emerging recognition that the monarchy simply couldn't keep standing still, or its potential to appear anachronistic would become too great. The announcement prompted conversations about the best way to uphold the Queen's memory while crafting the future for a modern society. In the days prior to the announcement, palace insiders regaled the media with stories of private reflections and remembrance and private commemorations regarding the Queen's life and service, which served as mute reminders of the burden inherited by her successors. These meetings helped build the camaraderie that honored both the dignity of the institution and the people within, even during some tough decisions. The subtle but powerful announcement was inspired by the Queen's lifelong example of service and sacrifice. This instilled a notion of stewardship in the succession, to ensure the future relevancy and integrity of the monarchy. This was a message written with poetic precision, a message that was designed to touch the hearts of those who held the Queen in the deepest of regard, whilst preparing them for a chapter in her life. But opponents saw the announcement quite differently. Some argued that leaping such a barrier and breaking with tradition might upset the careful pas de deux that the Queen had managed through the years. Others, however, thought that the announcement was the natural way forward, a recognition that the Queen's reign was coming to an end, the end of an era, and the new generation had to find its way. The announcement, too, left questions about the future role of the monarchy in both British society and the Commonwealth. With the Queen's reign shaping the empire as a voluntary commonwealth of nations, such shifts were seen as a piece of an evolving puzzle to lay out roles and responsibilities in royal circles. In that context, there was a sense of reverence and urgency. The Queen's example was a guide to setting values, but also the impetus that led action to preserve the future of the monarchy, recovering from being nothing more than nostalgia and to buttress it against the changing world in the interest of the people the monarchy is there to serve, including both the royal family and the nation. Considering the life of the Queen, the recent news provided a double-edged test to respect the past while welcoming the future. This difficult tightrope walk could well determine where the monarchy will go in years to come. The leaking of this news sent shockwaves through the media and set off an aggressive battle between the press and the palace, revealing the complicated media dance at work around royal communications. This is the same monarchy that has hothoused its relationship with the press for generations, balancing the high-wire act of access and control, narrative manipulation and suppression. What does this recent issue draw to our attention? It demonstrates just how unstable and weakness this relationship is, and reflects the momentous ripples that appeared once the news hit the streets. Newsrooms around the world struggled to decipher and share the information, with each media organization providing its own vantage point and agenda. Old media, especially outlets with long ties to the monarchy, sought to read the announcement with a degree of solemnity and deference. Their reports emphasized the moment in history of Benjamin's speech and the position of the monarch in general, as well as the necessity of the reforms announced. Opinion articles praised the palace for being willing to face painful truths and to evolve with the times. On the other hand, the tabloids and clickbait stories seized the statement to generate tantalizing headlines and exciting fiction. The words crisis, family feud, and monarchy in crisis became clichés, feeding public interest and worry. Unverified rumors, gossip from anonymous sources, and insider accounts were treated as truths, with the line between journalism and entertainment all but erased. The palace was put on the back foot by the raised level of interest, having to mount fast responses to counter false stories and preserve the image of the monarchy. Social media exacerbated the divided conversations, as people on Twitter and TikTok sparred over the news, the fallout memes, viral videos, and trending hashtags driving the court of public opinion, at times stepping away from official stories going in real time. Communication teams are now in the incredible position of having to be a part of that rapid, decentralized conversation while still trying to control the process without looking heavy-handed or out of touch. The palace's press office, for its part, put into place an aggressive array of media strategy. They provided exclusive interviews to favored royal correspondents, shared carefully selected background details with certain reporters, coordinated and manipulated photo opportunities to project unity and stability. These were all moves designed to move away from chaos and toward normalcy and optimism. Nevertheless, attempts to control the narrative were stymied by internal leaks and dissent. Some palace insiders disclosed information to the press, unofficially leaking information and adding fuel to the fire. There were sometimes conflicting reports from on-the-ground reporters, adding to the confusion over the family's actual feelings and motivations. This world of partial transparency set off a chain reaction in which every disclosure begot more leaks and rumors. Simpson also stood out for the press-palace dynamic on a global level. The ins and outs of British royal protocol were not easily understood by the foreign media, which tended to interpret proclamations through their own culture and politics. Reaction ranged from admiration for the adaptability of the monarchy to skepticism about its role in the modern world. These conflicting perspectives shaped diplomatic studies and popular opinion in the Commonwealth nations. In the UK, political pundits discussed the implications of the announcements for the constitution. Some argued that the monarchy's evolving approach to communicating reflected broader concerns with governance and accountability, while others warned against disrupting centuries-old procedures, which could undermine the crown's symbolic nature. The announcement was placed within a wider national conversation on the monarchy's finance and need for change, held in parliamentary debate. It also put the emotional side of the announcement front and center, noting its importance in the national discussion on autism. Anecdotes by royal watchers, former palace staff, and other public figures were some sad and nostalgic, others hopeful and curious, but all basic on the fact that the monarchy is an institution with individuals making their way through uncharted territory. And it had the added effect of making the press rethink its relationship over time. Coverage was both hagiographic and tabloid-esque as journalists negotiated the tug-of-war between access and prying skepticism. The increased coverage has sparked conversations within the media industry about ethics, accountability, and the future of royal journalism. Some favored balance and respect, others believed that transparency required fearlessly mined investigative journalism. At its core, the palace media war was a fight over control of the narrative, who would control the story, set the agenda and shape public opinion. The stakes were undeniably high. The future of the monarchy depended not only on substance of announcement of military intervention but also on the layman's opinion about this measure. The press played a powerful role as the court was aware of the perception, etc., and the palace had to walk a thin line between transparency and discretion. In the grandeur of the royal announcement, there were people whose lives were transformed irreversibly, although largely unobserved. Those unseen victims were the ones who bore the brunt of change, not the notable faces on the news, but rather the behind-the-scene household staff, the distant relatives, the charity workers and many others whose roles and their futures suddenly seemed less certain. The palace houses hundreds of staff members, footmen and housekeepers as well as drivers, gardeners and aides, whose rhythms of life are deeply interwoven with those of royal existence. Many had been expecting episodes of more of the same, and now were dealing with new responsibilities, altered work schedules or even anxiety about job security as the monarchy reorganized its priorities. A veteran footman gave vent to his view, gazing and noting the daily round, the punctilious ritual, the uninterrupted sequence of events interrupted by this sudden announcement. We don't get to receive his tea or to be the door openers, we get to be part of a tradition that is now seeing some unexpected editing, he said. The same feelings were reflected among many workers, who feel torn between serving Crown with pride and despairing at an uncertain future. Beyond the staff, secondary relatives and those who live the furthest from the public eye were also indirectly affected by it. Now that people who had relied on their connections to the royal family for charity work or social status were finding themselves called on about their roles. They discovered they were no longer being invited to events, had events postponed or cancelled and quietly lost their patronages. This announcement marked a loss of access and influence for them. Charities with royal affiliations were quick to feel the impact of the announcement. It furnished a basis for assessing their funding, public support, and media attention. Some institutions took this as an opportunity to reinterpret their missions in their own ways, but for others, dissolving royal patronage might threaten their raison d'être. Volunteers and beneficiaries, who often had little sense of palace dynamics, suddenly found themselves uncertain of the fate of programs that had a personal effect. The announcement also sent shock waves through the royal family's innermost circles. Loyal aides, advisors, and even security forces were put to the test as loyalties were up for grabs. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more breaking royal updates. Stay tuned, because the story is just beginning.